Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. You know how much we love to dig into the stories behind the music, and today we're cranking up the volume on a topic that's both fascinating and kind of messy rock star firings.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see what happens when those larger-than-life personalities clash or when creative differences reach a boiling point.
Right, like what leads to a band deciding to kick out one of their own,
Mm.
especially when it's someone who helped shape their sound and their success.
And what happens to both the band and the musician afterward? Do they rise from the ashes, or do they become a cautionary tale?
So to explore this, we're going to take a look at some of the most legendary rock star firings. From the Beatles to Metallica to Black Sabbath, we'll uncover the stories behind these splits, understand the impact they had on everyone involved, and see if there are any common threads or lessons to be learned.
It's like a musical game of what if. How would these bands and these musicians have evolved if those firings hadn't happened?
It's a question that's hard to answer, but it definitely makes you think. Okay, so let's start with a firing that has that real what-if energy. Pete Best, the original drummer for the Beatles.
Yeah, this one is almost hard to imagine now because Ringo Starr is so ingrained in our image of the Beatles.
Right. But before Beatlemania swept the world, Pete Best was right there with them, playing those marathon gigs in Hamburg and Liverpool.
He was a key part of their early sound and helped them develop their stage presence.
But as they were getting ready to record their first album, their producer George Martin wasn't totally sold on Pete's drumming.
There were some concerns about his technical abilities in the studio.
And maybe some personality clashes within the band, too.
Possibly. So, right on the cusp of global superstardom, Pete Best was out, replaced by Ringo Starr.
And we all know what happened next.
Yeah, Beatlemania exploded and Ringo's drumming style became an essential part of their sound.
But I wonder, what happened to Pete Best after he was let go? That's got to be a tough pill to swallow. A guy who is almost a Beatle.
Oh, it was definitely a blow. But what's interesting is that he eventually found a different kind of recognition.
How so?
He's participated in Beatles festivals, written about his experiences, and in a way become a symbol of what might have been.
So instead of being erased from history, he's become part of the Beatles' lore from a different angle.
Exactly. He's embraced his place in their story and found a way to connect with fans who are curious about those early days.
Okay, so from the Fab Four, let's crank up the distortion and head into the world of thrash metal. Dave Mustaine's firing from Metallica. That's a whole other level of rock and roll drama.
Yeah, this one is less about studio precision and more about clashing personalities and creative visions.
Mustaine was a founding member of Metallica, co-wrote some of their early songs, and was known for his aggressive guitar style.
He was a force of nature on stage, but his personality and his issues with substance abuse created a lot of friction within the band.
There were arguments, fights, even physical altercations.
It was a volatile mix. So in 1983, just as Metallica was on the verge of breaking big, they fired Dave Mustaine.
Talk about a turning point, both for Mustaine and for Metallica.
Absolutely. Mustaine was understandably furious and channeled that anger and frustration into forming his own band, Megadeth.
And they quickly became one of the biggest names in thrash metal, going head-to-head with Metallica for fans and critical acclaim.
It's almost like that firing was the catalyst that pushed Mustaine to create something new and powerful.
Two legendary bands born out of one dramatic split. Okay, so from thrash metal, let's shift gears to the godfathers of heavy metal, Black Sabbath. And here, the story takes a darker turn involving addiction and self-destruction.
This is where Ozzy Osbourne's struggles with drugs and alcohol really come to the forefront.
By the late 70s, his behavior was affecting everything: performances, recording sessions, the band's overall stability.
He was spiraling, and it was taking its toll on everyone.
So in 1979, Black Sabbath made the incredibly tough decision to fire Ozzy.
It was a heartbreaking move, but it might have saved his life.
And then enter Sharon Arden, who would later become Sharon Osbourne. She saw Ozzy's potential and helped him launch a massively successful solo career.
Crazy Train, Bark at the Moon. Those hits cemented Ozzy as a metal icon in his own right.
And it's interesting to think about how Black Sabbath, even though they continued making music with different singers, never quite reached the same level of fame as they did with Ozzy.
It speaks to the unique chemistry that Ozzy brought to the band and the undeniable power of his stage presence.
Okay, from the darkness of Black Sabbath, let's take a trip to the psychedelic side of things with Syd Barrett and Pink Floyd.
This is a story that's filled with both creativity and tragedy.
Syd Barrett was the creative genius behind early Pink Floyd. He was a visionary songwriter, guitarist, and experimenter who pushed the boundaries of psychedelic music.
He was a true innovator. But as the band's fame grew, so did the pressures of touring and the toll that psychedelic drugs took on Syd's mental health.
His behavior became increasingly unpredictable and erratic. There were stories of him just standing on stage, not playing, completely lost in his own world.
It was a difficult situation for everyone. The band brought in David Gilmour to support Syd, but eventually it became clear that something had to change.
So in 1968, they made the painful decision to let Syd go.
It was a move that was driven by concern for both the band's future and for Syd's well-being.
But sadly, Syd's mental health continued to decline, and while he released a few solo albums, he largely withdrew from public life.
It's a bittersweet legacy, a reminder of the incredible talent that was lost and the complexities of navigating mental health challenges within a band.
Okay, from the psychedelic world of Pink Floyd, let's head back to the Sunset Strip of the 80s, where we find a story that adds another layer to these rock star firings, the business side of the music industry.
Vince Neil and Mötley Crüe. This is a case where the line between creative differences, personal issues, and straight-up business decisions gets really blurry.
Neil embodied that hard-partying, over-the-top spirit that Motley Crue was known for. But behind the scenes, tensions were rising.
There were creative clashes, personality conflicts, and growing concerns about Neil's commitment to the band.
And in 1992, Motley Crue made a decision that they framed as a necessary business move. They fired Vince Neil.
They presented it as a way to ensure the band's longevity and commercial success.
Neil went on to have a solo career, but fans missed the original lineup. And perhaps sensing that Motley Crue brought Neil back into the fold in 1997.
It's a fascinating example of how the business side of music can sometimes intersect with personal and creative dynamics.
All right, let's dive back into the world of funk rock with a story that illustrates the cyclical nature of addiction and its impact on bands John Frusciante and the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Ah, yes, Frusciante, a supremely talented guitarist who joined the band as a teenager and helped create some of their most iconic albums.
Like Mother's Milk and Blood Sugar Sex Magic.
Exactly. But as the Chili Peppers' fame skyrocketed, so did Frusciante's struggles with heroin addiction.
He left the band in 1992, unable to cope with the pressures of success and his personal demons.
It wasn't so much a firing as a personal decision driven by his addiction.
But it left a huge void in the band.
And then in a twist that mirrors the ups and downs of addiction, Frusciante rejoined the band in 1998.
Bringing a renewed energy and a deeper level of musicianship to their sound.
They released massive albums like Californication and By the Way, but the relationship remained complex, and Frusciante left again in 2009.
It's a reminder that talent and success don't make you immune to the challenges of addiction.
It's a powerful illustration of how personal struggles can impact even the most successful bands.
Okay, let's stick with the hard rock world and talk about a drummer whose legacy continues to resonate even though he was fired from one of the most iconic bands of all time, Steven Adler and Guns N' Roses.
Adler's drumming on their debut album, Appetite for Destruction, was explosive. He had a raw energy and a distinctive groove that helped define their sound.
But like so many others in this episode, Adler's struggles with heroin began to affect his ability to play.
Yeah, it reached a breaking point when he couldn't keep up in the studio during the recording of Civil War.
And they made the difficult decision to let him go.
It was a controversial move, but Adler's drumming style remains deeply appreciated by fans. And he's made guest appearances during Guns N' Roses reunion shows, which speaks to the impact he had on the band.
It's a reminder that even in the midst of personal struggles, a musician's contribution can leave a lasting mark.
Absolutely. Okay, for our final story in this section, we're heading to the grunge scene of Seattle, where we find a firing that emphasizes the importance of musical chemistry and finding the right fit. Chad Channing and Nirvana.
Channing was the drummer for a big chunk of Nirvana's debut album, Bleach. He was there during those early formative years as they were developing their raw grunge sound.
But as Nirvana's music evolved, Kurt Cobain began to feel that Channing's drumming style wasn't quite gelling with the direction he wanted to take the band.
It wasn't a personal thing, it was more about musical compatibility.
Right. Cobain was looking for a heavier, more aggressive sound, and he felt that Channing wasn't the right fit.
So they parted ways amicably, and shortly after that, Dave Grohl joined the band, solidifying the lineup that would go on to conquer the world with Nevermind.
Talk about a game changer. Grohl's drumming brought a whole new level of power and precision to Nirvana's sound.
It's a reminder that finding the right musical fit is crucial for any band.
It's about finding those musicians who complement each other's styles and can create something truly special together.
Okay, so we've heard 9 stories of rock star firings, each with its own mix of drama, creative differences, personal struggles, and the ever-present influence of the music industry.
It's been a wild ride, right? We've seen how these firings can be turning points leading to new musical projects, personal redemption, and the formation of legendary bands.
But it's also important to remember the human toll. The heartbreak, the missed opportunities, and the long-lasting impact these events have on everyone involved.
It reminds us that even in the world of rock and roll, where larger-than-life personas and creative clashes are often celebrated, there are real human stories behind these events.
Stories that are worth exploring and understanding.
Exactly, because they offer a glimpse into the complexities of creativity, collaboration, and the human condition.
And that's what makes these stories so fascinating. So stay tuned, because in our next segment, we're going to dig deeper into these stories and see what common threads emerge. What patterns can we find in this chaotic world of rock and roll firings?
We'll explore the impact these firings had on the music industry itself, and we'll see if there are any lessons to be learned from these often messy but always compelling stories.
So buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride.
I can't wait. It's a reminder that even in the world of rock and roll, where larger-than-life personas and creative clashes are often celebrated, there are real people with real stories and real struggles behind these events.
And sometimes those struggles just can't be ignored. So as we step back and look at all these stories, what are some of the common threads or patterns you see emerging?
Well, one thing that really jumps out is just how complex these firings are. It's rarely ever just one thing. You've got the creative differences, personality conflicts, the substance abuse issues, the pressures of fame and fortune. And sometimes it just comes down to not being the right fit for where the band's sound is going.
It's like all these forces swirling around, eventually leading to that breaking point.
Exactly. It's kind of like a pressure cooker situation.
Mm-hmm.
And then you add in the fact that these bands are often really close-knit, like families almost.
With all the baggage that comes with family relationships.
Right. So you can imagine how intense things can get.
Yeah. Makes you think about whether these firings, difficult as they were actually necessary for some of these bands to reach their full potential.
That's a really interesting question to consider. In some cases, like the Beatles without Ringo or Nirvana without Dave Grohl, it's hard to imagine them achieving the same level of success with different lineups.
It's almost impossible to picture those bands with anyone else behind the drums.
Right. And in other cases, the firings actually gave those musicians the push they needed to forge their own path, like Dave Mustaine with Megadeth or Ozzy Osbourne going solo.
So even though these splits were often messy and full of drama, they could also be seen as catalysts for creativity and change.
Absolutely. They shake things up, force bands to reevaluate their direction, and sometimes those shakeups lead to something even greater.
It's kind of like that saying, when one door closes, another one opens.
That's a great way to put it. It's a reminder that even in the world of rock and roll, which can seem so chaotic and unpredictable, there's often an underlying sense of purpose or maybe even fate.
I like that. So for aspiring musicians out there, or even anyone who's fascinated by how creative partnerships work, what do you think is the biggest takeaway from all these stories?
I'd say it's recognizing that even the most talented and successful bands aren't immune to conflict and change. It's just part of the creative process and part of life itself, really.
And to be open to the possibility that those challenges can sometimes lead to unexpected growth and opportunities.
Exactly. You never know what might come out of those difficult moments.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here in our deep dive into Rockstar firings. Before we wrap up, any final thoughts on how these events have shaped music history?
I think it's safe to say that these firings, turbulent as they were, have been instrumental in shaping the landscape of rock and roll.
They've spawned new bands, influenced musical styles, and given us countless stories that we're still talking about today.
And they remind us that behind the music, behind the legends, there are real people with real struggles and real dreams.
It's those human stories that make the music so relatable and so powerful.
And that's what makes rock and roll such an enduring and captivating art form.
So true. So to everyone listening out there, as you continue to enjoy your favorite bands, remember that the music you're hearing is often the product not just of talent and creativity, but also of drama, heartbreak, and resilience.
It's all those elements combined that give the music its depth and its emotional impact.
Beautifully put. And that brings us to one final thought-provoking question.
Hit me with it.
Would these bands have achieved the same level of success, the same legendary status without these personnel changes, as difficult and messy as they might have been?
Now, that's a question that could be debated for years to come.
It really speaks to the lasting impact of these stories, these moments in music history that continue to fascinate and intrigue us.
And that's the beauty of it. It keeps us thinking and exploring and appreciating the music on a deeper level.
Absolutely. So we'll leave you with that question to ponder. What do you think? It really makes you think about how these moments of upheaval and change can have such a huge impact on the trajectory of a band's career.
It's like a ripple effect. One change can lead to a whole cascade of other changes, sometimes for the better, sometimes not.
Definitely. And it shows that even in a field as creative and free-spirited as rock and roll, there are still these pivotal moments that can shape entire legacies.
It's a reminder that the music we love isn't just about talent and inspiration.
Mm.
There's a whole lot of human drama and decision-making going on behind the scenes.
Well said. Well, I think we've done a pretty thorough job of unearthing these stories of rock star firings. It's been a fascinating journey through the ups and downs of music history.
It really has. And I think we've gained some valuable insights into the dynamics that shape not just individual bands, but the music industry as a whole.
To all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the sometimes turbulent world of rock star firings.
We hope you've come away with a deeper appreciation for the stories behind the music and the often difficult choices that have led to some of the most iconic moments in rock and roll.
It's a reminder that every time you listen to your favorite bands, you're hearing not just the music, but also the echoes of those struggles and triumphs.
The heartbreaks and the breakthroughs that have shaped the sounds we love.
Exactly. So until next time, keep exploring the world of music and all its complexities.
And never stop digging for those hidden stories that make the music we love so compelling.
And who knows? Maybe we'll uncover some more of those stories together in our next deep dive.
Sounds good to me.